Hello, this is your host Todd Lewis, the Prayers of Fight podcast. I'm going to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook. And you can support me on Subscribe Star logos and buy me a coffee. And also, don't forget to check out my Substack. So tonight's show is going to be entitled "Ideas Are Not Immutable Characteristics," and this show will be broadly two sections. The first section is going to be what this problem is and describing it in detail. And then the first step you can take in addressing that problem, though in yourself, not necessarily in others, because we'll get to that in a moment. So we're going to begin now with tonight's talk, entitled "Ideas and Beliefs Are Not Immutable Characteristics." Over the years of my life, one of the most frustrating elements of dealing with people is how when you're having an argument with them and are making a point, they suddenly spaz out at you and attack you, like physically assaulted them, or intentionally said something to insult them. Closely related to this phenomena is when you are arguing with someone and after knocking down all their arguments and waiting for them to change their mind, they say something like this: "Well, I don't care about these arguments. I'm still X," where X represents some ideological commitment, which might be political, religious, or philosophical. Both of these phenomena puzzled me for a long time, but I'm beginning to formulate an explanation. The simplest way to describe this phenomena is that people are treating some mutable characteristics, in this case, their beliefs, as immutable. Let's dive into the meanings of these two words before we go further. Mutable means that it can be changed or altered. Immutable means it cannot be changed or altered. For example, a man's biological sex, ethnicity, eye, and hair color are immutable characteristics. The length of his hair is not, as it can be cut, or let grow out, or shaved off entirely. It is mutable. Elements of the human body are mutable. For example, if a man works out, he will grow in size and strength. A certain latent plasticity exists, but his genetics place a hard limit on him. For example, he cannot fly like a bird under his own power. But the really important thing to consider here is that ideas, beliefs, and one's own conscious self are mutable. At birth, you don't have ideas or beliefs, and your conscious self is very simple. Then as you grow, ideas and beliefs come into your mind via the three main sources of experience, conditioning, and reasoning. An example of a belief that is derived from experience is fire burns or water is wet because one physically touched both substances. An example of a conditioned belief would be a belief that is the result of propaganda, for example, a corporate ad campaign or a Hollywood movie. An example of a belief generated by reason would be a man who believes the conclusion of a hypothetical syllogism. The problem with beliefs that come from both experience and condition is that they are both derived without thinking and implanted into your mind without rational thought. They become standard operating procedures, and while depending on the belief set, they may or may not be good or bad, it is unwise to found your entire worldview and way of life on them. With propaganda, the goal is to incept into your mind ideas without asking. As the old Adbusters commercial with a man watching a television with a barcode stand on the back of his neck: if the service is free, you are the product. The question then becomes, what kind of product are you? Reasoning skills have been actively discouraged in education for over a century now. In their 1913 occasional papers, the Rockefeller from the General Education Board states, "In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. The task we have set before ourselves is very simple as well as very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them to be perfectly ideal life just where they are. So we will organize our children into a little community and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way in their homes and the shops and on the farm." This initiative, along with others, has created a world in which people are conditioned to act procedurally and integrate themselves with technical systems to be controlled by their oligarchic overlords, rather than think for themselves This broader set of conditioned responses that we often mistake for thoughts or reasons for doing something are nothing of the sort. Your mind is the product being created by this educators and propagandists. How does all this get back to my earlier experiences? People who react in the aforementioned ways do so because they haven't thought about the ideas or beliefs they hold. You can tell this quite easily. Since it is seen as a moral good to have reasons for belief, people will look for apologists on their side who provide them with arguments. This shows us that the individual does not come to the belief after reading an argument, but is looking for arguments to justify his belief. Another test is to show this person that his arguments are bad by providing him with what Plantinga calls defeaters. Defeaters can be seen as true propositions that defeat or counter the premise of your opponent. When you knock down all the pillars holding up his ideology and he still doesn't change, then you've shown the ideas or beliefs are not the result of cogitation, but something else. Furthermore, the problem with conditioned responses, though propaganda, is that you are not even aware it is happening. You then reflexively believe that this is just who you are, just like your biological sex or ethnicity. This error results from failing to comprehend the source of this knowledge. Further compounding error is the failure to disentangle your consciousness from external stimuli. For example, you are not what you have gone through. One can imagine a man who's gone through some trauma and then believes who he is that trauma. From this, he develops all sorts of pathologies and complexes. Yet all he has to do to free himself is to realize he is not the trauma, nor is he the man who was deformed by the trauma. He is something else. That something else represents his higher self and ability to rise above the trauma and become something new. You are not your ideas. Let us use a quote from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes novella, A Study in Scarlet. I quote, "You see," he explained, "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic, and you have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with lots of other things, so he has a difficulty in laying his hand upon it. Now, the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment, and all in the most perfect order. And it is a mistake to think that the little room has elastic walls and can distend to any extent. Depend upon it, there comes a time when for every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is one of the highest importance not to have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones." Close quote. Two things stick out here: the brain attic itself and the furniture. Your brain attic can be seen as your mind. That is you. It is your mind and not someone else's. But the furniture you put in is not you. It might shape and affect you, but over time furniture breaks. Memory loss. Furniture is thrown out, abandoning false ideas through rational reflection, or old conditioned ideas being replaced by new propaganda updates. And new furniture can be put in, new propositions and new conditioned responses. The fluidity of your brain attic furniture means that the furniture is mutable, the brain attic is not. It's yours and no one else's. We can look at a person throwing out furniture in his brain attic and replacing it with new furniture. We can envision two versions of this that is, to an untrained observer, appear indistinguishable from each other. One version is the result of ratiocination, which means the process of reasoning. The other version is the result of getting app updates and overwriting a line of code. In the former case of ratiocination, one looks at one's beliefs and then compares that belief to other beliefs and facts about the world. Then, through a train of thought, utilizing formal syllogisms, one moves from premise to conclusion in valid arguments. If the premises are true, then the argument is sound. Beliefs that are the product of sound arguments are the gold standard. This is what is under the hood, so to speak, when one piece of furniture is thrown out and replaced with a new one in the former case. This process is active and deliberate. In the second case, the process, think back to the Adbusters commercial, one is not even aware of what is being done to them. It is as if a physician is subcutaneously injecting you beneath the skin. But in this case, it is an idea being implanted in you, with the skin, which represents your reason, being bypassed. This injection sequence can be seen as being initiated when one is exposed to propaganda. One can also see this process as a programmer the propagandist, as writing lines of code that govern your thoughts and actions. He might tear out lines of code, throwing out furniture, and then putting new code in, putting in furniture, all without you being aware. You are a program being written to run subroutines and scripts. Apt-get installed, do what I tell you to do. This latter case, the individual is passive and ideally unaware of what is going on. This unawareness is part of the reason he thinks these ideas are a part of himself. They are natural, as breathing or sleeping or growing fingernails. Or, for example, if people talk about instincts in both animals and humans, these can easily be confused for instincts because since you don't know where these ideas came from, and often came from sources before you were aware of what they were, most people aren't savvy enough to distinguish an instinct, like, say, for example, hunger and the need to eat, or fatigue and the need to sleep, from a conditioned response to, for example, play a video game or watch a movie. Further confusion between mutable and immutable characteristics occurs in the simulation nightmare we find ourselves in. Using Baudrillard's 4 levels of simulation, we can see how reality is distorted. A first-order simulation seeks to reproduce a reality. A second-order simulation seeks to hide what is there. A third-order simulation seeks to hide what is not there. And a fourth-order simulation makes no reference to other realities but itself. This is hyperreality. With media saturation from TV, the internet, movies, and more, people are totally disconnected from reality. This confuses them about what is a mutable characteristic and what is not. The most obvious example of this is transgenderism, where the person believes he can really change his biological sex. What is so hard for modern man to realize is, due to the nature of his material conditions in a technological society, he is separated from lived realities that people in the past took for granted from lived experience. A good example of this is the way capitalism and technology hide social relations and, for example, the source of food production. The entire supply chain to get to your grocery store is hidden, and only with intentional effort will people find it. This is what leads me to speculate that raiders in any collapse scenario will avoid livestock and raid supermarkets. Yet history is replete with armies and raiders capturing and butchering livestock for food. This direct, intimate connection is gone, and most people are going crazy because of it. To sum up where we are at present: 1, ideas are not mutable. 2, you are not your ideas. 3, people are trained to not think rationally. 4, people are conditioned through propaganda to engage procedurally with technology, finance, the bureaucracy, and each other. 5, this is the result of widespread change in education, going back to the Rockefellers. 6, people are taught to act procedurally. 7, we explore the ideas of the brain attic and filling it with furniture. And 8, you can fill up the brain attic with furniture either through the reasoning process or through propaganda conditioning. Having outlined the source of this problem, both in yourself, others, and yourself, the next question is what to do about it. With regards to others, not a whole lot. The Stoics were correct when they argued in most cases you do not have a lot of control over things or others or your surroundings. There's a corollary position: you cannot give others what you do not possess yourself. So, for example, as is quite likely, you have also blown up at people for much the same reasons I described at the beginning. There are any effort to help others before you help yourself will fail. You won't have what you need to offer yourself as a result of both principles. You have to start with yourself. So let's begin with oneself. This is the hard part. We have all had furniture placed into our brain attic by this process of propaganda. And the first step in dealing with the problem is identifying which piece of furniture in your brain attic are the result of reasoned arguments or incepted by some outside propagandist. This is where things get hard, really hard. You must look into your own brain attic and look at each piece of furniture and try to determine how it got there. This will, again, be challenging. It was for me, as you will not always know why any given idea or set of ideas exists in your mind. You can broadly divide the furniture into 2 categories: the pieces you know why they are there, and those you do not. In the first case, they might be there either due to reasoning or propaganda, and you just know from experience or reflection that this is the case. The ones you don't know are going to be harder. The question one might ask is, how am I to determine which pieces of furniture are the result of ratiocination or propaganda? The test is simple to explain, but hard to do. You have to sit down and look at each piece of furniture and then construct a syllogism in which the piece of furniture is the conclusion. If you cannot do so, then you have some reason to suspect it was placed there due to propaganda. This is not only the explanation, you might be insufficiently skilled in the reasoning process to engage in this exercise. In that case, you'll have to provisionally put a hold on this process and learn more about the reasoning process. Let us have another detour with Sherlock Holmes in the study of Scarlet. Here is a portion of a dialogue between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Well, really can be hardly described as otherwise, said Sherlock Holmes, smiling at my surprise. The proof of its intrinsic simplicity is that without any help, save a very few ordinary deductions, I was able to lay my hand upon the criminal within 3 days. That is true, said I. I have already explained to you that what is out of the common is usually a guide rather than a hindrance. In solving a problem of this sort, the grand thing is to be able to reason backwards. That is a very useful accomplishment and a very easy one, but people do not practice it much. In the everyday affairs of life, it is more useful to reason forwards, and so the other comes to be neglected. There are 50 who can reason synthetically for one who can reason analytically. I confess, said I, that I do not quite follow you. I hardly expected that you would. Let me see if I can make it clear. Most people, if you describe a train of events to them, will tell you what the result would be. They can put these events together in their minds and argue from them that something will come to pass. There are few people, however, who, if you told them a result, would be able to evolve from their own inner consciousness what the steps were which led up to that result. This is the nub of the issue. That you have furniture in your brain attic is established. The question then becomes how to determine the source and cause of each piece of furniture. Reasoning backwards or analytically is the key to solving this problem in your own life and by extension helping people solve it in their own life. In the story The Adventure of Silver Blaze, Sherlock Holmes discusses the importance of imagination. It's this way, Watson, he said at last. We may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the instant and confine ourselves to finding out what has become of the horse. Now, supposing that he broke away during or after the tragedy, where could he have gone? The horse is a very gregarious creature. If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or go over to Mapleton. Why should he run wild upon the moor? He would surely have been seen by now, and why should gypsies kidnap him? These people always clear out when they hear of trouble, for they do not wish to be pestered by the police. They could not hope to sell such a horse. They would run a great risk and gain nothing by taking him. Surely this is clear. Where is he then? I have already said that he must have gone to King's Pyland or to Mapleton. He is not at King's Pyland, therefore he is at Mapleton. Let us take that as the working hypothesis and see where it leads us to. This part of the moor, as the inspector remarked, is very hard and dry. But it falls away towards Mapleton, and you can see from here that there is a long hollow over yonder, which must have been very wet on Monday night. If our supposition is correct, then the horse must have crossed that, and there is the point where we should look for his tracks. We had already been walking briskly during this conversation, and a few more minutes brought us to the hollow in the question. At Holmes's request, I walked down the bank to the right, and he to the left. But I had not taken 50 paces before I heard him give a shout, and I saw him waving his hand to me. The track of a horse was plainly outlined in the soft earth in front of him, and the shoe which he took from his pocket exactly fit the impression. See the value of imagination, said Holmes. It is one of the qualities which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and found ourselves justified. Let us proceed. So in order to generate from your inner consciousness a chain of events that might have led to your furniture being placed in your mind, you need a healthy dose of imagination, which is another way of saying creativity. Let's see here. Okay. To briefly summarize this point, in order to sift through the furniture of your brain attic, you need to be able to reason analytically, that is backwards. And then from your own imagination, imagine a path that gets you there. Then you must gather evidence and test each link in your chain of reasoning, as does Sherlock Holmes, but this is the mechanism by which we can determine which pieces of furniture are the result of reason, thoughts, or propaganda. Most people have little to no formal training in logic and reasoning and have little time to fill in the gaps of their education. Then I recommend they start where I started, by reading Sherlock Holmes. Start with the study in Scarlet and focus on Sherlock Holmes' methods, and then read the other stories. Furthermore, engage your mind by envisioning yourself as Mr. Holmes and seek to act like him in your own life. This sort of mental conditioning is a preamble to formal logical education. In conclusion, people react with hostility to your arguments with them when they think you are personally attacking them. This often occurs because they fail to distinguish between immutable and mutable characteristics, their thoughts and beliefs being mutable. But thinking their thoughts and beliefs are mutable, they make a category mistake and torpedo the discussion. The error is the result of people not being trained to think and by being subjected to widespread propaganda. We explore the idea of a brain attic and the furniture in it. We then discussed how the furniture could get there either through reasoned arguments or propaganda. We then discussed how one might begin the process of sifting through your brain attic by reasoning analytically and using your imagination. There is a lot of work to do. All right, the chat, we have GF, Corbin, and Seema Soblain. Seema Soblain, my attic is full of slop. And it's leaking into the garden. Yikes. GF, all of what you said humanizes people more rather than just have externalizations of jumbled ideas that spurg out into the world. Well, part of the problem is this just didn't happen in the past. I mean, again, I guess you have to have read literature and history like I did, but I mean, you had to be pretty deliberate in order to get someone to explode at you as if you were attacking them. And, in a normal argument, that's not what I'm trying to do. So for me, the reasoning backwards from my own experience, the question was, well, wait a minute. That reaction doesn't fit the inputs. So like what's going on, right? So I'm like, well, they're clearly mistaking what's going on, but then I didn't know what the nature of the mistake was. And of course, partly that's due to because I didn't know about Baudrillard yet. That's a big part of it. But also just reflecting on what I already did know, like say Sherlock Holmes or other philosophical elements. Also too, especially when I was very young, I hadn't been trained how to think logically yet either. So there's that issue as well. And so the first thing to figure out is why does, in the case of the interlocutor, that piece of furniture exists in his brain attic. And one thing I didn't mention, which in hindsight I think I should have, is a lot of these beliefs are psychological security blankets. They're not held because people believe them to be true, because they can be proven to be true. There's something in that person's life that they can't cope with or handle without that idea. They're usually not just going to tell you. In fact, they may not even know. And you may not know either, depending on how close of a friend you are. So then you get an impasse real fast. And the psychological angle takes a lot of unpacking to do. Narrative discourse, social circles and neo-Christian churches, as well as churches that lack structure philosophically. Yep. GF, I asked myself why people behave this way and not change their mind. Through this, you really helped. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Stone, excellent points. I think he needs to say Holmes, but yeah. Well, so yeah, the other thing was, like I mentioned, psychology as well. They're not like confusing their beliefs for